Good afternoon, everyone.
Bon après-midi.
Thank you for joining us at CGLCC's 2021 Digital LGBT+ Global Business Summit, New World. I'm Brad Sutherland, National Manager Business Development at Air Canada.
And I'm John Torrey, Director of Business Development for Air Canada, a proud sponsor of the summit and of this next series. We welcome all faces at Air Canada, as employees, as suppliers, and as customers, as we believe in equal business opportunities regardless of one's sexual orientation or gender identity.
Despite the significant challenges due to COVID-19, diversity and inclusion remain top priorities at Air Canada. Workplace diversity is one of the most important keys to an organization's success. Diversity brings different talents together, and using different sets of skills when working towards a common goal leads to more creative, innovative, and productive teams. We help employees achieve their full potential and highlight all employees' unique contributions within a diversified and inclusive work environment.
Our whole diverse team is proud to have been recognized by Media Corps Canada as one of Canada's best diversity employers for the 6th consecutive year.
It is now with pride that we introduce today's session.
À ce point, nous sommes fiers de vous présenter
ESG and Recovery, a discussion with Brian Gallant, CEO of Canadian Centre for the Purpose of the Corporation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ESG in Recovery Next Step session. I hope everybody's enjoying the summit so far. My name is Donalyn Turner, and I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional with Diverse Advantage Consulting. I come to this DEI profession having spent most of my career working for equity-seeking causes such as LGBTQ community organizations, mental health organizations, and health equity-focused organizations. I've been working as a consultant with my organization, Diverse Advantage, for the past 3 years now, and I continue to approach this work very much from a community lens, helping my clients to work authentically with and for communities that are traditionally marginalized by our social and organizational structures. My clients all embrace this work knowing that their organizations, no matter how big or small, have the power to affect positive change for society, and my role is to guide them through that process to make the biggest impact possible. Diverse Advantage Consulting is excited to have recently become a certified diverse supplier through the CGLCC. And I'm really happy to be with you today to welcome Brian Gallant and Jamie Watt to share some of the research and insights with regards to this environmental, social, and governance work. Most of us know Brian as the 33rd Premier of New Brunswick, and Brian also served as the Attorney General of New Brunswick, the Minister responsible for innovation and women's equality. Currently, Brian is the Special Advisor on Innovation, Cybersecurity, and Law to the President of Ryerson University and an entrepreneur in residence for the DMZ Incubator, as well as a Special Advisor at Navigator and the CEO of the Canadian Centre for the Purpose of the Corporation, whose work he'll be sharing with us today. Also joining us today is Jamie Watt, the Executive Chairman of Navigator, who's specializing in complex public strategy issues, serving domestic and international clients from all sectors. Jamie has led groundbreaking political campaigns that have transformed politics because of their boldness and creativity. Many of us know Jamie because he regularly appears as a public affairs commentator in the media, television news shows, and he has a regular column in the Toronto Star. So they're both busy guys, and we're really happy to have them with us today. So thank you to Brian and Jamie for joining us. And I'm now going to pass things over to Jamie to get started.
Well, thanks, Donna, very much. And thanks to all of you for being here. And thanks to the CGLCC for inviting us to present today. Both Brian and I are delighted to be with you. You can tell the gay guy from Navigator from the straight guy from Navigator by the one has a pink shirt and one has a white shirt that we both have in our navy blue jackets. But there you go. That's a little color code for you. I was thinking today, it hasn't always been as easy as it is today to stand up and to stand out as a member of the LGBT plus community. It's not always been so easy to be gay. Well, actually, it's always been pretty easy to be gay, but that's not been the hard part. But to be truly out and to be truly included is something that's more difficult. And so when I built Navigator, I was really looking to build a place where people could be their whole selves and they could bring themselves to work. And this was long before it became a fashionable thing to do. But I thought if we could build a genuine meritocracy, what a great way it would be to go to work every day. And in hindsight, we were a bit ahead of a curve in building that and focusing on what we now know as equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this kind of a workplace, one with strong values and a clear commitment to team, is one where employees are more than willing to work hard and to give back to their company, to clients, and to the community. I think it's been one of the drivers of our success over our 20 years in business. And for sure, when we had to pivot during the pandemic, that's where that resiliency really came from. Of course, now we see a major social awakening where many traditionally marginalized groups are speaking up, and there's new pressure put on businesses and other organizations to create a safer, more inclusive, more equitable space. And this is a fundamental change. It's a significant change that's taking place in the market, and it's going to continue to reshape the way that we deal with business long after the pandemic fades into the background. As a firm built on the basis of equity and inclusion, I thought we were well suited to create a vehicle that can understand and address this movement, and more importantly, help business engage in meaningful change. And that's what we had in mind when we created the Canadian Centre for the Purpose of the Corporation. It doesn't matter what language is being used, CSR, ESG, stakeholder capitalism, shared value. It all boils down to one question. For what purpose does your organization exist? The Canadian Centre for the Purpose of the Corporation's mission is to help business understand the evolving expectations and become driven by purpose and focused on stakeholders rather than being responsive to social pressure. Through proprietary research that we've conducted, the CCPC can understand and analyze how expectations are changing and help companies respond accordingly. In creating the CCPC, we were so lucky to be able to attract Brian Gallant as its first CEO. As you'll know in his introduction, Brian is just one of the superstars of Canadian public life, so gifted in understanding how to use the levers of government to improve people's lives. He was just the perfect person to do this. He's done an enormous amount of research in the area. He's interviewed over 100 CEOs, and in addition to which, he has created with the CCPC a panel of experts from coast to coast to coast that are just out of this world. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian, who will share with you some of the research that we've done to investigate Canadians' views of these issues a little bit more deeply.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you very much, Donna, and to Daryl, the whole organizing team. Thank you. Incredibly happy to be here. What a wonderful event, what a wonderful summit up to now. And as Jamie mentioned, we're delighted to be here. And I'm especially excited to show you some of the research that we've been doing at the Canadian Centre for the Purpose of the Corporation. So on that note, we're going to bring up the slides. Pre-pandemic, there was a change that was being thrusted upon the private sector. There was a wave crashing upon businesses. One thing that has become really clear since 2020, the world has indeed changed. And it has changed for all of us, all institutions. Canadians, and I would argue people in the Western world, desire more from all institutions, and that definitely includes businesses. It includes large businesses for sure, and to some extent, small and medium-sized businesses as well. We're going to be showing you over the next 25 minutes or so research that we have done at the center over the last year. The bottom line is pretty simple though. Canadians want more from business. They want to work for purpose-driven and stakeholder-centric organizations. And they're very open to having government intervene to create the new capitalist economic system that they would like to see. So the bottom line to the title of this presentation, ESG will be a big part of the recovery. When asked what businesses should focus on, very interestingly, an overwhelming amount of Canadians said businesses should put the interest of other stakeholders, communities in which they work, their employees, retirees, consumers, governments, on par with the interest of shareholders and profits. 85% agreed with that statement, while only 15% agreed that businesses should be focused solely on shareholders and profits, essentially the Milton Friedman argument of capitalism. Although 83% of Canadians agree that businesses, corporations play a vital role in the economy by creating jobs, fostering innovation, and providing essential goods and services, 78% of Canadians also agree that Canadian businesses and corporations should contribute more to the betterment of society. Presenting this to many CEOs and C-suite executives, I recognize that some will say, I don't understand, how can these two statements be true at the same time? Essentially, the hypothesis of the center is that Canadians understand the economic benefits of the business community, of corporations, of large businesses, but at the same time, they want to see these organizations do more on the social front. So we wanted to test exactly what that meant and what was preoccupying Canadians and what was the things that were keeping them up at night. We asked them, unaided, meaning we gave no options, what is the largest challenge facing the globe at the moment? 28% said some version of inequalities of wealth, of revenue, of income. 25% said some version of the environment and or climate change. 22% said inequities in treatment and discrimination, whether that be towards Black Canadians, whether that be towards Indigenous people, whether that be towards LGBT plus community, and many more. At a time that we were in the middle of a health pandemic, which indeed was putting a lot of strain on the economic system, and at the time, this was in July, a lot of uncertainty, only 21% said some version of the economy. And only 5% said some version of healthcare. These two topics, I can tell you from my former life, are usually very top of mind of Canadians. But something has happened since 2020. Not only the pandemic, but other events have certainly awakened people's sensibilities and people's desire for challenges to be addressed and overcome. And then the sixth challenge that you see in front of you is at 16%, the overall social environment that was named by Canadians. And essentially that boils down to mistrust in institutions and each other, geopolitical tensions, polarization, populism, isolation, and things of that nature. Now you may wonder, how concerned are Canadians about these issues? So we took the 4 societal issues that were named in the top 5 that were not the economy. And we asked people on a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned are you about this challenge? So the percentages you see in front of you are essentially how many people said a 7 on 10 or higher. So you can see in the bars to the left for each of the challenges, the 4 that I went through, social environment, the environment and climate change, inequalities and inequities. You can see that the left would be in July of last year and May would be this year. To the right would be this year. So interestingly, on all fronts, it's about 2/3 of Canadians would place their concern a 7 on 10 or higher. All of them went down a little bit. Now, most of them are in the margin of error, but we would be remiss if we didn't mention that inequities does seem to have dropped a little bit. In July of 2020, there were certainly a lot of discussions happening with regards to inequities and discrimination and racism in Canada and across the globe. So that may be the explanation, or it may be the fact that some businesses and organizations and governments have stepped up because of those events in earlier of 2020, or it may just be a bit of the margin, or of course it could be parts of all of the above. So as mentioned, the bottom line, Canadians want more from business. This is very evident, and it's been evident in all the research we've done in the last year, and it was certainly evident in the thought leadership and research being done pre-pandemic. We asked in July, tell us of all the institutions, of the following institutions, who is actively working to tackle issues right now? So we tested government, media, big Canadian business, small and medium-sized business, academia, and NGOs. And as you can see, on all 4 challenges, governments and NGOs are number 1 and 2, meaning that Canadians believe those are the 2 institutions that are trying right now to do the most to tackle these 4 societal challenges. You'll note that big Canadian business is last for every single one of the 4 societal challenges. Small and medium-sized businesses are in the middle of the pack. Our hypothesis was confirmed with this research that essentially there is a difference in Canadians' views vis-a-vis big Canadian business and small and medium-sized businesses with regards to their contributions, but probably more likely their responsibilities. We then asked in July, who should be doing significantly more to tackle issues? Interestingly, although government was number 1 and number 2 in terms of actively working to tackle these issues, they were overwhelmingly number 1 for every single one of these societal issues. Our hypothesis is because indeed people still think that governments are the ones that are ultimately responsible for more social causes. And that's why they can have these 2 things be true at the same time. Yes, they're contributing to tackling these challenges, but at the same time, they need to be doing more. You can see number 2 for every one of the societal challenges, big Canadian businesses. This is very evident. This makes it very evident that Canadians want more from businesses, and they want them specifically to be helping tackle these 4 societal challenges. Small and medium-sized businesses, no surprise given the first slide, find themselves in the middle of the pack yet again. We asked that question again just a few weeks ago. And here you can see the differentiation between the responses in July 2020 and the responses in May 2021. So who should be doing significantly more to tackle these issues? Government has increased immensely over that time period. You can see they're overwhelmingly number 1 on all fronts, and they have definitely increased above the margin of error. All the other institutions find themselves roughly at about the same number that they were about a year ago. You can see that small and medium-sized businesses seems to be one of the only institutions that have actually had expectations decrease, which is interesting. A hypothesis I would put forward, although I will say that we have, other than this data, no research to determine this, but the hypothesis I have is that a lot of Canadians are probably feeling quite bad for small and medium-sized businesses, as they have certainly been some of the people that are either on the front lines and or they're struggling due to the restrictions that have been placed to deal with the health crisis. And you can see a mixed bag on some of the other institutions in terms of expectations and the movement over the last year. All of this is leading to the following perception. Canadians want capitalism to change. 75% of Canadians believe that capitalism should be reformed to be more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable, or completely replaced. So to break that down, 16% would say that capitalism is broken and just needs to go. It has to be replaced. A small number, relatively speaking. Only a quarter of Canadians, though, would say that it's not perfect, but capitalism works pretty well. Let's go with the status quo. The majority find themselves in column number 3. Capitalism should be reformed so that it is more inclusive, fairer, and more sustainable. 59% of Canadians agree with that statement, which is up from 2020 when it was at 55%. So now let's talk a little bit about what all this means for businesses and what challenges this presents. So the first one, Canadians are turning to governments. This is definitely a challenge for the business community. To remind you, the proportion that said government should be doing significantly more to tackle issues is high and is growing. That said, we don't think it is just about government stepping up and doing things. We also think that the responsibility to tackle these societal challenges may be falling on government's shoulders for a few reasons, including that Canadians want governments to force businesses to step up. So we asked Canadians just a few weeks ago if they agreed that governments in Canada need to get tougher with Canadian businesses and corporations through laws, regulations, and taxes if we were to overcome societal challenges. Indeed, 72% of Canadians said that they believe that needs to happen if we're going to overcome climate change. 68% believe that needs to happen if we're going to overcome inequalities. 63% believe that needs to happen if we're going to overcome inequities. Clear appetite for government intervention, which most likely is the reason for it is most likely because Canadians don't believe businesses will step up and do it on their own, and that they will indeed need government to force their hand. Challenge number 2, changing employee expectations. We asked just a few weeks ago if people's priorities have changed since the pandemic. 78% of Canadians have said, yes, I've changed my priorities. Either many of them, some of them, or a few of them. I don't think this should come as much of a surprise. When people's lives are uprooted, there's no question they may start to reflect on their life priorities. Well, we have the data to demonstrate that we don't have to assume that. It definitely is the case. You, I'm sure, would want to know what priorities have changed. No surprises here, I think. This is something that we've all gone through. People's families, people's health, both physical and mental, have increased in importance since the pandemic has started. The amount of money that people save for a rainy day has increased as a priority a little bit, not as much as the first ones mentioned. People's friends, a little bit as well. But if you look at the last one tested, people's work, the amount of people that said that yes, it's more of a priority, and those that say that it's less of a priority is a score of 0. It's a wash. So you can clearly see that people's changing priorities have landed on family and health. To give you a sense here, you can just see the numbers. 70%, 70 plus were saying that family is more important. 73% of Canadians said, yes, indeed, my family is more important to me now than it was at the start of the pandemic. The same thing, of course, for the physical health, which shouldn't come as a surprise. And mental health, for those that have been following the trends since the pandemic, probably doesn't come as a surprise either, with approximately 2/3 of Canadians saying that that's a higher priority for them. Moreover, it's not evident on exactly what Canadians want to have happen when we restart our businesses and ask people to come back into the workplace. 47% of Canadians would say that they would like to have a familiar employment situation with one employer and a stable work environment, while 53% of Canadians, so a bit more than the former, would like to have a diverse employment situation with several employment options and a flexible work environment. This is interesting, but also, of course, a challenge for Canadian businesses. There's also a change in people's expectations vis-a-vis the business and corporations and the stands that they take publicly on important issues. Overwhelmingly, Canadians are open to having Canadian businesses and corporations take a stand on issues such as fair wages, such as on diversity and inclusion matters, things that would be with regards to the environment, and many more. Although the percentages, as you can see, vary, I think the message is pretty clear. There's an immense openness for businesses to start to get involved on social issues. I think a lot of employers will be happy to hear, though, that Canadians do think their employer has made an effort to adopt the priorities of employees that are ever changing. So you can see here, 73% of 34, I believe that the employer made a big effort. 39 said that they made some effort, and 17, well, little effort to adapt to the ever-changing priorities of employees since the pandemic. So this is overall good news for the business community, there's no question. That said, when asked if the employees believe that their employer reflects their values, only 25% strongly agreed that they did. That's not a bad number in the sense that it's higher than the 18% that would say does not reflect my values. But the real number here is 57% that say somewhat. So definitely a lost opportunity to have employees completely engaged and, of course, ultimately more productive and happier to be working with the employer of their choice because they believe that the employer reflects their values. And this is leading to 42% of Canadians being open to considering to changing their job or even their career in the next year. So 42% would say, yes, I may change my job when it is possible to do so. If you're wondering what's driving that sentiment, interestingly, is not what we would normally think. Often people will say it means that they're not being compensated properly or they need more benefits. That really is at the bottom of the list. Only 6% of Canadians that are considering leaving their job in the next year said it was due to compensation. The main reason given was because they believe their employer cares almost solely about revenue and profits and does not care enough about important stakeholders like employees. All the other reasons given fall into a few camps. One, work-life balance, and the other really is about values, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. So to all the employers listening, I think this slide is a very important one for you to retain. Moreover, in July of last year, 56% of Canadians said they would actually take a lower salary to work for a business that adheres to a stakeholder definition. And the stakeholder definition means that the business would be focused on employees, customers, the communities in which they operate, and so on, instead of a shareholder focus. To be fair, however, 9% would say very likely to take a pay cut. So put that in perspective. But nevertheless, the majority does say that they're open to the idea. And the last challenge that I'd like to talk to you about is a lack of trust. And this data actually comes from our sister organization, where they looked into trust, and essentially big Canadian businesses of all the institutions named a while ago find themselves near the bottom of the list. Small and medium-sized businesses are third, with 48% saying that their overall trust is a 7 on 10 or a 10 on 10, or 7 on 10 or higher on a scale to 10. And you can see the only thing that's lower than big business is news found on social media. And Discover, our sister organization, did a poll to see how people's trust in certain institutions and even politicians has changed over the pandemic. They developed a pandemic trust progression score. And you can see that many institutions and professions have gained a lot of trust over the pandemic, while some have lost trust. So doctors and other healthcare professionals, the scientific community gained immense trust. Small and medium-sized businesses gained a plus 22 pandemic trust progression score over the pandemic. Your employer, which is interesting, and I'll come back to in 2 seconds, a plus 15. Provincial premiers, a minus 15. Large businesses and corporations, minus 18. And the Prime Minister, minus 25. Interestingly, though, as we know, a lot of people work for large businesses and corporations. It makes up a huge percentage of the workforce. It's interesting to see that that's a minus 18, while your employer is a plus 15. So there could be an element to this that really is about people saying, yeah, my employer has tried to adapt. My employer has really gained trust, or at least maintained trust. Well, while businesses and corporations that maybe I have a customer or client-based relationship, I don't trust them as much as I did pre-pandemic. And small and medium-sized businesses, the hypothesis would be the same as I mentioned a while ago. People probably feel that they have certainly been struggling, and they're doing their best to ultimately help their employees and their stakeholders, including their customers, be able to get through the pandemic. Moving forward, real quick pieces of advice. Well, people want to see purpose-driven and stakeholder-centric organizations. So you should really map out an organizational implementation plan. To do so, certainly centers like the CCPC can help. So seek out advisory services. Take time to do an organizational assessment to get a good idea of how you're doing on these important questions, things that are important to Canadians, to employees. How well are you doing in ensuring that all parts of your organization is focused on your purpose? How are your stakeholders doing, and what can you do to help them do even better? You need to find ways to completely immerse yourself in the concepts that is purpose, the purpose of the corporation, ESG, CSR, all of these things that really point to the role of business in society. And you need to then stay abreast of the risks and trends. All of you that have come to watch this presentation, it's either a first great step, or it's hopefully a nice way to maintain your understanding. But it really is important because it is a very dynamic conversation that changes on a weekly, if not daily basis. And of course, equity, diversity, and inclusion are at the heart of what Canadians want to see in the workplace, what Canadians want to see Canadian businesses and institutions of all sorts really try to address. So do everything you can to find out how your organization is doing on those fronts. Try to go further and do better. And then also do not be afraid to speak out and talk about other organizations, other institutions that may not be living up to the values that Canadians want to see of that institution in question. And you certainly have from your employees a license to do so, as you saw in the research. Alors, merci mille et une fois pour votre temps. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this data dump. I hope some of it has been helpful. I very much look forward to hearing your questions and comments.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. That was a lot of information. Just before we go too much further into audience questions, I just wanted to clarify, you talked about 56% of folks would accept a lower salary to work for a business that adheres to the stakeholder definition. Could you just give us a kind of in a plain language sort of, what does that mean, the adhering to a stakeholder definition? You gave us a kind of a couple of steps that folks could start to take, or organizations could start to take, but can you just sort of take a step back and explain that to us? Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Donna. So I may actually be a little more high level and philosophical, but I think it'll help. It really is about being either a shareholder focused organization. And what that really embodies for those that aren't corporations is that you're solely focused on profits. You're focused on helping the capital owners of the organization be able to make a profit. So the way in which the capitalist system probably has that manifest itself in the most clear way is through a corporation where shareholders are trying to get their returns. So that would be kind of version one. And then version two really is a stakeholder-centric approach, stakeholder capitalism, as we often hear, where really the organization is focused on lifting up all stakeholders, from their employees to their customers, to the communities in which they operate, to their suppliers, to the planet, to the environment, to society in general. And that stakeholder-centric approach is really the way in which Canadians expect businesses to contribute to the societal challenges of climate change, of inequalities, and of course, inequities. And if I can just extend the question a little bit, the data and the research demonstrates very clearly that people expect organizations and businesses to then ensure that their organization is inclusive, their organization is sustainable, their organization is equitable. And then they want the organization to speak out when they see others that have to do better. And then they also want to ensure that the circle of influence, whether that be, again, your suppliers, the communities in which you operate, you're doing everything you can to support them and all the stakeholders that are within the circle of influence to be able to have an equitable, inclusive, and sustainable society. So really, at the end of the day, it's those two kind of pillars. One is the former is really the Milton Friedman approach, and the stakeholder approach is really what we've seen in many discussions such as ESG, CSR, and shared value and all of that jazz.
Excellent, thank you. A question from the audience. Do you think the movement towards a common ESG standard, such as the one put forth by the World Economic Forum in their Measuring Stakeholder Capitalism report, is taking the other stakeholder interests enough into account, or is it still too investor-led?
It's interesting because one of the main things that has to happen is definitely have investors step up. The investors are sort of one of the silent partners of the capitalist system. And often the businesses that are feeling the pressure the most when it comes to stepping up on ESG, when it comes to stepping up on stakeholder capitalism, on being purpose-driven, are those that have Canadians, those that have the public as their customers. Well, those that might be B2B or those that may have other models that aren't really direct to consumers may not be feeling as much pressure because the public sort of don't see them day to day in their going on. So really, there's no question that investors is something that we should all, from a societal point of view, be focused on. But at the end of the day, you also need to be looking at all other types of players and stakeholders within the economic system. And of course, the idea is, Jamie said it very well, it all boils, because we have so many terms and so many things that we're trying to measure. At the end of the day, it boils down to what is your business doing to help society? What is the purpose of your business, and how is it going to help stakeholders, meaning people around you, people involved with the organization? It really just boils down to that. So at times when we talk about all these measurements and all these terms and acronyms, we lose ourselves in the very simple conversation. Canadians want these institutions, all institutions, including businesses, to help. And let's put in measures and let's put in ways that we can measure the success of them doing so.
Great, thank you. Maybe a question for Jamie. Is it possible to give us your thoughts on how this stakeholder, this sort of stakeholder way of looking at things, how does that impact specifically LGBTQ communities?
Might be on mute, Jamie.
Of course I'm on mute. You'd think I would have figured that out after however many months it's been. It just proves that I'm a moron. But anyway, I think actually it's our secret weapon. I think that LGBTQ plus people are particularly well placed because of our own lived experiences, the power of being the other, having watched sometimes things go by and not been included, having to adapt ourselves in different ways. I think many of the things that have been part of our lives are actually make us, particularly well suited to compete in this particular environment. So I'm bullish about the gay perspective, and I think it's a total competitive advantage right now.
Great, thank you. One more question from the audience, and then we probably might be running out of time. What can governments do? You mentioned that, it seems like pretty much everybody wants governments to do more in this area. What can governments do to encourage more businesses to embed ESG principles in their everyday activity?
It's 2021. I had to do it as well. There's a lot they can do, and as you can see, there's an appetite for them to do it. Now, one of the things you could be as draconian as saying a business has to basically be created and exist to address these things. And ESG is very important, of course, and it's a great measurement tool, don't get me wrong, but we need to unpack that a bit too, right? There's underneath environment, social, and governance, there's a bunch of other things that need to be very specifically measured. So you could go as far as saying that. You could go as far as saying a government could basically have a policy that they're not going to do business. They're not going to support directly or indirectly businesses and industries that aren't stepping up on these measurements. You could weave in the SDGs as well, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to force businesses to step up. And you can just basically go and create laws, charge taxes, and put in regulations to force businesses' hand to step up on the societal challenges that concern Canadians. That said, I have to say this message because I know there's a lot of business leaders in the audience. Business community needs to step up and proactively start to address these things, because if that doesn't happen, it'll be unfortunate that government will be compelled to do this, and it'll just create an environment in which government that definitely has to play a role will feel forced to do so, will do it maybe in a draconian way. They may try to do it to prove a point, and that's just not the right conducive environment to create good public policy on such complex matters. So really, if I can encourage the business community listening to step up, and as Jamie said, I'm sure a lot of these principles are embedded in your organizations already. Enhance that if you can, step up and encourage others to do the same. Call out those that aren't, because there's certainly an appetite for you to do so, and really participate publicly in these conversations. And that will hopefully mitigate this appetite that government forced the hand of businesses, because again, government has a role to play, of course, but when they're forced to do so by the public and they're forcing businesses, the word force isn't always that good when you want to have an environment in which you have great consultations, you're considering all points of view and perspectives, and developing solid, holistic public policy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brian. And we are at time. So I want to thank Jamie and Brian for all of your research and insights into this. And there were a couple more questions from the audience, so I would encourage people to reach out directly to Brian to continue these conversations. And feel free to reach out to any of us to have these talks. And I wanted to thank everybody for participating, and the audience for your great questions. And thank you so much to everyone at the CGLCC for organizing this fantastic summit. And I know you're all working hard on it, and we all appreciate it. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of the summit and a good afternoon.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, everyone.